Alrighty here. Okay, so we want to convert 12 psi absolute pressure to torr gauge pressure. So let's talk about gauge pressure first, right? Remember, gauge pressure is how much more than an atmosphere we have, right? So if we actually had a container that was at 12 psi, right? If you can just imagine this, right? There's actually 14 psi outside, right? 14.7 psi is atmospheric pressure, right? Okay. If this is 12, then this container would actually, there'd be more pressure on the outside. It would tend to crush the thing, right? Okay, it's kind of like when you take your water bottle from, up at the top of Mount Hood and you've got it closed. Let's say you got like a smart water bottle or something with the thin walls, right? And you drive down to Portland and suddenly the walls of the container are getting pushed in, right? So this is actually, we would call this a negative gauge pressure, right? So what is it? It's absolute is gauge plus an atmosphere, right? In this case, it's 14.7, right? So 12 is equal to the gauge plus 14.7. So obviously our gauge pressure is negative, right? Now, keep in mind that a negative gauge pressure is I mean, in theory with a liquid, you can actually have a negative pressure. Negative pressure would be that it's not actually pressing on the walls of the container, it's pulling on it, right? And fluids can do that, but gases just can't. Okay, they always push. Okay, so if I do this, 14.7 minus 12, or 12 minus 14.7 is negative 2.7. Right, and now we can just convert that to torr, right? And that's easy, right? So negative 2.7 over 14.7, right? This turns it into an atmosphere, and then we multiply by 760. See if I can get the microphone to quit rubbing up against my face there. Okay. If I do that, I get negative 139.59 or negative 140 decimal point torr. Again, remember, the negative just means it's below atmospheric pressure. Okay. Doesn't mean that it's actually pulling on the inside of the container. Let's take a look at the next conversion here. Okay. Oops. There it is. All right. Convert 2,000 psi gauge to absolute pressure in pascals, right? So the absolute pressure is the gauge pressure plus 1 atmosphere. Right, don't add just one, add 1 atmosphere, right? So in this case, it's 2,000 psi, and then because we're in psi, an atmosphere is 14.7. Okay? And so our absolute pressure is 2014.7, or part of the way through the year 2014, right? And then we can just turn this into pascals the way we do, right? So 14.7 over 14.7, and then we're going to multiply that by an atmosphere in pascals, right? Which is 1.013 times 10 to the 5th. Okay, so 20 divided by 14.7 times 1.013 times 10 to the 5th. And that is, this is like a big number. 1388361.93. Honestly, why do we pay all this money for these calculators if they can't put a freaking comma in there? Let's see, comma. So that is that 1.39 times 10 to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We're battling this software, and that's pascals. Okay, so that's the unit conversions. Just remember gauge pressure. If I don't say gauge pressure, I don't mean gauge pressure. Okay, in a science classroom, gauge pressure is just sort of a weird thing, and if I mean gauge, I'll say gauge. But understand that the rest of the world is sort of the opposite. Almost, I mean, you inflate your tires to 32 psi, right? Well, that's 32 gauge pressure because you're going to use a gauge which compares that pressure in the tire to the pressure outside. So this 32 means it's 32 more than 14.7. So the rest of the world, by the way, uses gauge pressure. If somebody says a pressure, in general, they're talking about a gauge pressure, unless they're in a physics or chemistry classroom.